call to die. That's what the title of this sermon is. Sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? Today we're going to explore this a little further, stretch it out, and see a little bit about what God might be calling us to. We're going to be looking at the story of Abraham. We're going to hear a little bit from Paul. And by the end, hopefully we'll have a little better understanding of what this means. A call to die. I'm going to start with a story. When Abe quit farming, he discovered that the town he moved to, he was the only Lutheran in this town of all Catholics. And that was okay, but the neighbors had a problem with his barbecuing steak every Friday. Since they couldn't eat meat on Friday, the tempting aroma was getting the best of them. Hoping that they could do something to stop this, the neighbors got together and went over to Abe. "Abe," they said, "since you're the only Lutheran in this whole town, and there's not a Lutheran church for many, many miles, we think you should join our church and become a Catholic." Abe thought about it for a minute. Might be nice to get back into a church again, and so he decided they were probably right. Abe talked to the priest, and they arranged a date for him to transfer from being Lutheran to Catholic. The big day came, and the priest had Abe kneel. He put his hand on Abe's head and said, "Abe, you were born a Lutheran, you were raised a Lutheran, and now," as he sprinkled incense over Abe's head, "you're a Catholic." Abe was happy and the neighbors were happy. But the following Friday evening at supper time, there was again the aroma of grilled steak coming from Abe's backyard. The neighbors went to talk to him about this, and as they approached the fence, they heard Abe saying to the steak, "You were born a cow, you were raised a cow," and as he sprinkled salt over the meat, "and now you are a fish." Abe, like many of us, was making his faith work by manipulating the things around him, and quite creatively, I might add. He didn't want to make the sacrifices or suffer because of his faith. We're going to now be looking at Abraham and some other passages that give us a little bit different example of what it means to fully give ourselves to God, and how when we give ourselves fully to God, we get more than just a steak on Friday. Abraham's story. We saw it up here a little bit. Abraham, originally Abram, he is the patriarch of our faith, the founding father, the original one that God called. He was called to leave his people, to leave his country, and go to a new place where God would take him. God made a covenant with him that he would make Abraham into a great nation, that he would have a long line of descendants following him. Abraham was willing to do this, but there was a problem. He and his wife, Sarah, originally Sarai, they were old, they were very old, and they were past childbearing years. They didn't have children. How was this going to work out? Even with this seemingly large obstacle, Abraham and Sarah answered God's call and left. They dropped everything, left all they knew and all they were, and let God lead them. Maybe this wouldn't be too hard for some of us to do with just our possessions, or to leave things, or maybe even leave family behind to move somewhere else. But let's fast forward a little bit and look at this next challenge that he had. Abraham and Sarah finally have a son, Isaac. He was their only child, the one who this long line of family heritage would flow through. But God now tells Abraham to take this one child, his own flesh and blood, and to take him up to the mountains and to sacrifice him to God as an offering. Seriously? I mean, leaving all your land and belongings behind is one thing. But this? But God insisted that Abraham's agreement was still intact, that he would still have a long line of descendants. So he takes Isaac up to the mountain to give his one and only son as a sacrifice. Does that sound familiar? At the last minute, though, God intervenes and lets the boy live, provides an animal for a sacrifice instead. But the point here again is that Abraham was willing. He was willing to give up his whole world, his son, his one chance at moving family past his generation. This is the kind of action we are called to let everything that is us go, to let everything that is who we are go and give it to God. We're going to look again at the passage that was read this morning, and I'm going to start in verse 32. Before this, Jesus is teaching, and Peter and the disciples are a little confused as to what he's saying, as what he's saying is going to happen to himself and to and what the disciples are being called to. We pick up here in verse 32. But Peter grabbed him in protest. Turning and seeing his disciples wavering, wondering what to believe, Jesus confronted Peter. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. Then he calls the crowd back over to listen along with his disciples. Verse 34, he says, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way. It's my way to saving yourself, your true self. What good would it be to get everything you want and lose you, lose the real you? What could you ever trade your soul for? Verse 38, if any of you are embarrassed over me and the way I'm leading you, when you get around your fickle and unfocused friends, know that you'll be an even greater embarrassment to the Son of God when he arrives in all his splendor, when he arrives in the splendor of God, his Father, with an army of holy angels. That's a lot in verses 34 to 38. Really brings it all to the top. But you may be thinking, I like my life. I'll give these things over here, but I still kind of want to hang on to this over here. If I give up everything, I'm going to be bound to rules and regulations, and I'm not going to have any fun anymore. But this is how it works. If we give it all up, God will give us the best of both. We will have the life of following God, and God will let us do some pretty cool stuff. Let's look at verse 38. This one is a tough one for me. I think it's still up there, yeah. Sometimes in groups or when I'm around people that I don't know very well, I can tend to be a little more introverted, reserved, quiet. I'll do more observing instead of standing out in the crowd and speaking. This was especially true for me in high school. I wasn't one of the cool kids, but I wanted to be. But I didn't like to talk in groups much, and especially with faith matters. I was afraid of what people might think or that I might offend someone. After high school, I went to Hesston College. At the start of my second semester, I got a phone call from home with the message that one of my friends jumped out of bed in the morning, and when he landed on his feet, his lower body went numb. My mom went on to tell me that they discovered a tumor the diameter of a basketball in his back. Before he died, I went to visit him a number of times. When I was home on break, I would visit him. When I wasn't home, we would send emails back and forth with each other. When I went to visit him a few times, I felt this strong sense that I was supposed to ask him how he was doing and where he was in his relationship with God. I know this sense was a call from God, but I didn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to ask him the really important stuff. Instead, I stayed with the shallow things. We talked about school, about majors, about sports, stuff that really didn't matter. After he died, I went to his funeral, and a bunch of us friends were all there, and most of them were crying. I tried. I was mourning his death as well, but I couldn't cry. I think it's because I knew that I had missed an opportunity and that I had denied God's call. I was more worried about what he might think of me or what my other friends might think of me if I brought up God and wondered how he was doing in that relationship. I missed the point. This still hurts to this day, and I hope and I pray to God that I won't let another opportunity like this slip by even once. I had multiple opportunities to speak up, but I didn't. And that makes verse 38 sting even more. God was more embarrassed over me in that moment than I was of him. I needed to let myself get out of the way and to let God lead. I still wanted to be in the driver's seat and to keep control. Control's a hard thing to give up, isn't it? Daily I have to give it up. Some days I'm better at it than others. How many times have you passed up an opportunity where you felt a stirring or felt a nudge to go do something or to say something to someone or to volunteer here at church? We pass these things up because we're not qualified. We don't have the time. You pick the excuse to put in there. There's many others we can go with. Instead of following that nudge, we pass it up. It can be hard. It can be a hard thing for us to do on our own. But here's the really cool thing about when we take ourselves out of the equation and let God lead. When you let Jesus take the wheel, you don't have to anymore. God will guide you, and he will give you the words to speak, the means to act, the ability to show compassion, the lesson to teach, and the words to preach.